Hey everyone, this is Casper here. I'm a historian that focuses on the second industrial revolution and its effects on global history, so from about the mid 19th century to the early 20th century. And my partner Becca actually handed me this TikTok clip, and I believe there's a full 1 hour, 51-minute video on YouTube from this content creator called Reb Maisel. And I haven't watched it, so I'm kind of interested to see what this is about.
Throughout United States history, martial law has been imposed at least 68 times in limited, usually local areas of the United
Correct.
States.
All
Twice
right.
for war or invasion, 7 times for domestic war or insurrection, 11 times for riot or civil unrest, 29 times for labor disputes, 4 times for natural disaster, and 15 times for, quote, other reasons. Out of the 68 times that martial law has been declared in United States history, there is one time that stands out as a very dark time in American history and also in
Hawaii.
Hawaii's history.
Right.
That was when martial law was declared on December 7th, 1941.
That's for
the
3 years, I
same day that
believe.
Pearl Harbor was attacked by the Japanese during World War II. When martial law was declared, no one knew that it would stay in effect for 3 years,
Yeah.
becoming the longest period of martial law in United States history. In Hawaii, which at that time was still simply a United States territory. The Army.
Not a lot of people know about that. Very surprisingly. I think when a lot of students are shown even in that high school level, when they're shown the United States map, they just kind of assume it's always been like that, or maybe most of it's been like that for, I don't know, 100 years or something. But it wasn't until very recently, actually, in terms of the historical timeline, during the Eisenhower administration, I believe in the early 1960s, correct me if I'm wrong, that Alaska and Hawaii became officially part of the United States. Hawaii has a very unfortunate history, as does most of the continental United States does, especially when we're talking about the natives, when we're talking about the indigenous peoples and their interactions with the European Americans that took over, essentially. And Hawaii is very interesting because not only is it really recent, but the way it was conducted in terms of the annexation, in terms of the overthrowing of the Hawaiian monarchy. It's a very interesting piece of history, but I also find it interesting that not a lot of people talk about it, or not a lot of classrooms cover it. Even at the university level, it's not really often hit on unless you're specifically going into a course or a seminar that covers that history. I think a really cool piece of literature I would highly recommend is by, I believe his name is Eric Avila. He wrote the Folklore of the Freeway, and that book kind of also covers Hawaii's history in terms of the freeways being built on the islands, and how some of the freeways acted as barriers racially, financially, for a lot of communities in America post World War II during the Eisenhower administration and onwards. Now, Hawaii was, or at least the Kingdom of Hawaii, right, was founded by Kamehameha the First. Now, if that sounds familiar, it is also a word in Dragon Ball Z, Kamehameha, right? And the last reigning monarch of Hawaii was Queen Luluakalani. Forgive me if I butchered the pronunciation. And she was essentially ousted from power when she tried to get sovereignty for the Kingdom of Hawaii, which at that point had American settlers. And it was kind of a Texas move where the people coming in to settle usurped the power or tried to set up the territory for official annexation by the United States government. And she was deposed. She was put under house arrest until she signed papers that would essentially hand over the Kingdom of Hawaii to provisional government, which would then become a republic, which would then become part of the United States. If this sounds familiar to some Texans out there, yeah, that was kind of the same playbook.
Controlled every aspect of life on the islands, from criminal justice to parking zones and
Correct.
curbside trash removal. The U.S. Army censored the press and monitored long-distance phone calls, cables, and civilian mail. Japanese language schools were closed,
Correct.
and all civilians except very small children were registered,
She knows her
fingerprinted,
stuff.
and required to carry identification cards. In anticipation of a second attack, residents were ordered to dig makeshift bomb shelters. Beaches were no longer just places for fun and recreation, and instead looked like military zones.
You have to also understand that, yes, this is the Second World War. The Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. Hawaii might be under threat from yet another potential Japanese attack, which, in hindsight, not very likely, because that was kind of one of their major efforts, or kind of major last-ditch efforts to try to keep America out of the war as long as possible in this Pacific theater. But yes, you have to imagine the effects, the toll it took on the local populace, the natives during this time. Martial law is not a joke. That's why the South Koreans, which I believe she also covers in the long form video, took it very seriously when the South Korean president tried to declare martial law. And martial law in this case for the Hawaiians was very stringent. Media, radio, telephone calls, like you said, there's mandatory curfews. Civil courts are replaced by military courts, which is very, very significant for any legal experts out there, or any person who is interested in law. Civilians were also denied constitutional rights that would be afforded to people in mainland United States. So there were a lot of things that happened. The military governors, of course, afforded a lot of power too. So you kind of have a little mini dictatorship going on under the U.S. military. So yeah, it was a very rough time. And in regards to the Japanese language schools, because Hawaii was becoming like I don't want to say melting pot because I really don't like that term sometimes, but was becoming a very diverse community. You had the Koreans there, you had the Japanese there, and Japanese language schools were closed because the Japanese were under a lot of scrutiny, and there's a lot of documented history about what the Japanese had to go through in the concentration camps. I'm going to say concentration camps, not internment camps, because that's sort of a kind of like sugarcoating it. They were concentration camps. FDR very controversially ordered Japanese Americans, even second, third generation, to have their properties and belongings confiscated, except for maybe personal belongings, and sent to concentration camps. And for Hawaii, it wasn't perhaps as much as their mainland counterparts had encountered, but they were under a lot of social and governmental scrutiny. It was not fun. It was not great. And yes, it did last for quite a few years. And of course, there's that residual mistrust.
Barbed wire was everywhere. At sundown, a complete blackout took effect. Schools were taken over by the military and entire neighborhoods were evacuated. All communication was censored, and the U.S. government ultimately burned over $2 million of cold hard cash and replaced it with newly minted currency that had the word Hawaii stamped on it. Peacetime courts were replaced with a military commission and provost courts that hardly functioned as paragons of justice. Hawaii's provost courts, which heard 37,000 civilian cases during that 3-year period, typically featured one single military officer serving as the judge. There were no warrants.
Yep, no constitutional
charges,
rights.
No juries, and no rights to appeal. Provost judges advised defendants not to get lawyers. Without such, quote, formalities of jurisprudence, the average trial time was reduced to 5 minutes, and guilty verdicts were handed down in over 90% of cases. Sentencing included such unconventional punishments as compulsory war bond purchases and blood donations. Martial law being declared in the territory of Hawaii had more to do with the fact that so much of the population of Hawaii was of Asian descent than it actually did with its geographical location and its proximity to Japan. And I'll tell you why. Officials in Washington, D.C. were leery of the island's multi-ethnic composition, especially the 159,000 ethnic Japanese residents who formed 38% of the territory's total population. Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox going so far as to recommend, quote, taking all of the Japs out of Oahu and putting them in a concentration camp on some other island.
This is very true history. Yes, the U.S. government, all the way to the executive level, they were very concerned and fearful of potential saboteurs or potential sabotage or some sort of maybe uprising by a lot of the Japanese Americans or just Japanese in continental United States. So I'm not really surprised. Some of this stuff I did not know because it's not my particular field of expertise as a historian. But yeah, I'm not surprised by the reactions to the Japanese living in Hawaii there, and of course the effects of martial law. Again, pretty serious stuff. And I really appreciate my partner Becca, who's not here with me right now, for showing me this. And this is pretty important history because this is not history that just happened 1,000 years ago or a couple hundred years or even 100 years ago. It's pretty recent. And I believe, as a result of a lot of the damaging effects of, U.S. government involvement in Hawaii and the construction of the freeways, definitely check that book out. A lot of Hawaiians, I think, even today, are still wanting sovereignty, some sort of even independence from the United States government or United States. And I'm not exactly sure what the status of that is really. I'm more familiar with the mainland reservations rather than the Hawaiian sovereignty movement. But let me know down in the comments below what's happening with that, because I am aware of its existence, just not sure of how much it's gained in terms of traction or attention. Probably not much. I mean, if we're looking at the case of Puerto Rico and the Puerto Ricans that demand recognition, it's very slow coming. And I think a lot of Americans tend to only think of the classroom map as America, but the American empire, and I'm going to call it an empire because it's still an empire, is much more than that. It has territories everywhere, or rather territories in a lot of places, military bases in quite a lot of countries, and it just seems like in terms of education, or at least learning the history, not a lot of Americans seem to be up for it, or at minimum, they're not really introduced to this kind of stuff. So I really love seeing this kind of content, even in short form, and I'm actually going to check her long form content out. And yeah, thanks for watching. If you guys have any other content you'd like me to react to as a historian, let me know. And see you guys next time.